My name is Alva, and at 35 years old, I never thought my biggest family conflict would revolve around my car collection. After 15 years of hard work in tech, I had assembled 10 rare vehicles worth $1.5 million each, one representing a milestone in my life. Then came the family dinner where my parents demanded I sell everything to buy my chronically unemployed sister a house. What happened next changed all our lives forever. Let me tell you how I ended up moving 10 cars in the middle of the night and why my sister just texted me from her very first job. Before I get into this wild story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had to stand up for something you love. My love for cars began when I was just a little girl. My grandfather owned a small auto repair shop in rural Michigan, and every weekend I would beg my parents to let me visit him. While other kids my age were playing with dolls, I was handing my grandpa wrenches and learning about engines. The smell of motor oil and the sound of metal tools clinking against engine parts became my favorite sensations. I remember the first time he let me sit behind the wheel of a 1965 Mustang he was restoring. I was only 8 years old, but in that moment, I knew cars would be part of my life forever. When I turned 16, my grandfather helped me buy my first car, a beat-up 1990 Ford Taurus that barely ran. Most teenagers would have been embarrassed, but I was thrilled. Together, we spent 6 months bringing that car back to life. It was during those long hours in the garage that I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would have a collection of beautiful cars that I had earned through my own hard work. College was the first major hurdle. My parents had traditional expectations for me, pushing me toward nursing or teaching. When I announced I wanted to study computer science, my father scoffed. He said technology was just a trend and that I should focus on something practical. My mother worried I would never find a husband in such a male-dominated field. Despite their objections, I took out student loans and pursued my passion. Those 4 years were tough. I worked 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a full course load. Sleep was a luxury I rarely enjoyed. Many nights were spent coding until sunrise, fueled by cheap coffee and determination. My roommates thought I was crazy, but I had a vision for my future that kept me going. After graduation, I landed a job at a small tech startup. The pay was terrible, the hours were worse, but the experience was invaluable. I absorbed everything I could about software development, business operations, and product management. My boss, David, became a mentor who saw potential in me that even I sometimes doubted. Within 3 years, I had been promoted twice and helped the company secure its first major client. At 27, I took the biggest risk of my life. I quit my job and founded my own software company. The first year was terrifying. I converted my tiny apartment living room into an office and lived off ramen noodles and determination. I coded day and night building a customer relationship management platform specifically designed for auto repair shops, inspired by the problems I had witnessed in my grandfather's business. Slowly, my company grew. From 3 employees working out of my apartment, we expanded to a real office with 15 people, then 30, then 50. By year 5, we had over 150 employees and clients across the country. Last year, I sold a 30% stake in the company to investors, for a sum that still seems unreal when I see it in my bank account. Throughout this journey, as each professional milestone was reached, I added to my car collection. Each vehicle was carefully chosen not just for its monetary value, but for what it represented in my life. The first was a 1967 Ford Mustang, similar to the one my grandfather had been restoring all those years ago. I found it at an estate sale when I was 28, just after landing our first major corporate client. It needed significant work, but restoring it connected me to those childhood memories in my grandfather's garage. Next came a 1974 Jaguar E-Type Series 3 after closing my first 7-figure business deal. The sleek lines and British racing green paint job made my heart race the first time I saw it. I remember driving it along coastal roads, the powerful V12 engine roaring as I contemplated how far I had come. The 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS was a different story. I discovered it forgotten in a barn covered in dust and barely running. The previous owner had given up on it, but I saw potential. Over 18 months, I worked with a restoration specialist, learning alongside him, getting my hands dirty whenever I could. The day it roared back to life was one of my proudest achievements. My collection grew to include a recreation of the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing, a 1988 Ferrari 328 GTS, one at a charity auction, a 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray split window, restored 1964 Aston Martin DB5, a rare 1981 BMW M1, a 1989 Lamborghini Countach 25th Anniversary Edition, and a first-generation 1992 Dodge Viper RT10. Each car had its story, its connection to a challenge overcome or a goal achieved. They were not just vehicles. They were physical manifestations of my journey, reminders of the girl who once handed wrenches to her grandfather and dreamed of something more. I spent weekends maintaining them, my hands still finding comfort in the familiar feel of tools and engine parts. I joined a local classic car club where I met people who understood this passion. Jackson became my go-to restoration expert, teaching me techniques I had never learned from my grandfather. Sophia, a talented automotive photographer, helped document my collection in stunning detail. We organized annual charity car shows, raising money for scholarships for women in STEM fields. These cars and these people became my sanctuary, a world apart from the pressures of running a growing tech company. When I slid behind the wheel of the Porsche or polished the chrome on the Corvette, I found peace that eluded me elsewhere. Each vehicle carried memories of the roads traveled, the obstacles overcome, and the woman I had become. Little did I know that this collection, built with such care and personal significance, would soon become the center of a family conflict that would test my boundaries and force me to defend what I had built. To understand the conflict that was brewing, you need to know about my sister Natalie. 7 years my junior Natalie grew up as the baby of the family, the one everyone protected and pampered. While I was expected to earn my allowance by helping around the house, Natalie received hers automatically. When I had to save for months to buy a new bike, my parents surprised her with one just because she mentioned liking a friend's. This pattern continued into our teenage years. When Natalie was 16, she borrowed my camera without permission and dropped it, breaking the lens. Instead of making her pay for repairs, my parents suggested I should have been more careful with where I left it. When she wore my clothes without asking and returned them stained, I was told sharing was what sisters did. College highlighted our different paths even more starkly. I worked multiple jobs and took out loans to cover my tuition. Natalie, meanwhile, had her education fully funded by our parents. They dipped into their retirement savings to ensure she graduated debt-free, a luxury I never experienced. She changed majors 3 times, eventually settling on communications before dropping out in her junior year, deciding college was not for her. The money spent on her education was never mentioned again. As I built my career and company, Natalie drifted. She worked as a barista for 6 months before quitting because she did not like the early hours. She tried retail but left after a disagreement with a manager. She was a receptionist, a dog walker, a personal assistant, and briefly a social media manager for a local boutique. None of these positions lasted more than a few months. Between jobs, she would travel posting photos from beaches and resorts while her credit card debt mounted. Despite her financial instability, Natalie maintained an expensive lifestyle. Her apartment was furnished with designer pieces. Her closet contained clothes with tags that made my eyes widen. When I asked how she afforded these things, she would vaguely mention credit cards or a generous friend. Sometimes, she would date wealthy men who funded her lifestyle temporarily, until the relationship inevitably ended. Throughout all of this, our parents maintained that Natalie was just finding herself. My mother would say, "She is still young," or "She has a free spirit." My father would shrug and remark that not everyone was as driven as I was, as if ambition was some kind of character flaw. My success, meanwhile, was treated as expected rather than celebrated. When I secured my first major client, my mother's response was, "That is nice, dear," before immediately asking if I was dating anyone. When I purchased my first new car with my own money, my father commented that I worked too much and should focus on starting a family before it was too late. My relationship with my parents had always been complicated. They loved me, I never doubted that, but they did not understand me. They viewed my independence as stubbornness, my ambition as an odd quirk that would eventually give way to more traditional priorities. When I spoke about my business, their eyes would glaze over. When I mentioned my cars, my father would sigh and say something about wasting money on things that just sit in a garage. Despite the strained dynamics, I tried to maintain a relationship with my family. I called weekly, visited for holidays, and sent thoughtful gifts. I also tried to help Natalie when I could, believing that was what a good sister would do. When she maxed out her credit cards at 22, I paid off the $10,000 balance, making her promise to be more careful. She was for about 6 months before the cycle began again. When she needed a car for job interviews, I let her borrow my everyday BMW, only to have it returned with empty takeout containers littering the back seat and the gas tank nearly empty. I helped her secure an apartment by covering the security deposit and first month's rent. 3 months later, she called in tears because she was being evicted for non-payment, despite spending that same month on a weekend getaway to Las Vegas. I even used my connections to get her an entry-level position at a friend's marketing firm. It seemed perfect, combining her communications background with a structured environment. She quit after 2 months, claiming the work was boring and her supervisor was mean. Each time I helped, I believed it would be different. Each time I was disappointed. My assistance became a band-aid that allowed her to avoid taking real responsibility. Meanwhile, my parents continued to enable her behavior, sending her money when she called in distress, making excuses for her job hopping, and never holding her accountable. Natalie's approach to life directly contrasted with everything I had worked for. While I built my company through consistent effort and personal sacrifice, she expected immediate results without the corresponding work. While I saved and invested carefully, she spent impulsively. While I valued independence, she seemed comfortable relying on others to solve her problems. Despite all this, she was still my sister. I remembered the little girl who would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike, bandaging her scraped knees, and defending her from neighborhood bullies. Those memories made it hard to set boundaries, even as I watched her repeat the same patterns year after year. What I did not realize was that my efforts to help were not viewed as generous by my family. Instead, they were considered the bare minimum, an obligation rather than a choice. This perspective would become painfully clear during a family dinner that would change everything. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was celebrating closing a major deal that would expand our software into international markets. My phone lit up with my mother's contact photo, and I answered with the good news on the tip of my tongue. She cut me off before I could share. "Alva, we need to have a family meeting. Something important has come up." Her tone was serious, lacking the warmth I was accustomed to even in our most strained conversations. "Can it wait until the weekend?" I asked. "I have back-to-back meetings tomorrow and Thursday." "No, this is urgent. We need you here tomorrow evening. 6 o'clock. Her firmness surprised me. Dad says, "It is important." A knot formed in my stomach. Was someone sick? Had something happened to my grandfather? Worry replaced my earlier excitement as I agreed to the meeting. The next day, I rescheduled 2 client calls and left the office early, driving directly to my parents' suburban home. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Natalie's Honda Civic parked out front along with an unfamiliar black Lexus. The knot in my stomach tightened. The atmosphere in the living room was tense when I entered. My mother sat perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. My father occupied his usual recliner face, set in what I had come to think of as his serious business expression. Natalie sat between them, an unusual spot for her, and she seemed almost excited, bouncing slightly in her seat. Next to her sat a woman I did not recognize, smartly dressed in a navy blue pantsuit, a leather portfolio resting on her knees. On the coffee table lay several glossy brochures and what appeared to be property listings. "Mom, Dad," I said hesitantly. "What is going on? Is everyone okay?" My father cleared his throat. "Alva, this is Teresa Martin. She is a real estate agent." I shook her hand, automatically, confusion mounting. The urgent family matter was real estate. "Please sit down," my mother urged, patting the space beside her on the sofa. "We have something important to discuss." I remained standing. "If this is about selling the house, why did not you just say so on the phone?" "We are not selling our house," my father said. "This is about Natalie's future." Natalie beamed a smile. I had come to associate with her getting something she wanted. I took a seat in the armchair farthest from the group, a defensive position I did not consciously choose. My father launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech about family responsibility and how those who are blessed with success have an obligation to help those who are still finding their way. My mother nodded along occasionally, adding comments about how families support each other through thick and thin. "Natalie needs a fresh start," my mother explained. "A place of her own somewhere stable where she can really build a life." Teresa, who had been silent until now, opened her portfolio. "I have found the perfect property," she said, her voice smooth with practiced enthusiasm. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a spacious yard in a desirable neighborhood with excellent schools nearby. She passed me a listing for a large colonial-style home price tag just under $900,000. "It is perfect," Natalie gushed. "I can use 1 bedroom as a home office, and the basement would make an amazing entertainment space." She proceeded to describe her plans for decorating, mentioning brands and designers I knew were well beyond her means. I looked from the listing to my parents still not understanding why I was there. Then my father dropped the bombshell. "We think you should sell your car collection to buy this house for Natalie," he said, as casually as if suggesting I lend her a sweater. "The cars just sit in that garage most of the time anyway, and this would be an investment in your sister's future." The room seemed to spin slightly. Surely I had misheard. "You want me to sell my cars, all of them, to buy Natalie a $900,000 house?" My mother reached for my hand. "Honey, you know how much Natalie has struggled. This would give her the stability she needs. You have your company, your condo. You do not need those cars." Natalie nodded eagerly. "You could always buy more cars later when I am on my feet. And you could visit anytime. There is plenty of space for you to stay over." I pulled my hand away from my mother's. "Those cars are not just things. They represent 15 years of hard work. Each one marks a milestone in my career. And besides, Natalie has never kept a job for more than a few months. How would she pay the property taxes? The utilities? The maintenance?" My father waved away my concerns. "She is interviewing for several promising positions. And we would help with the initial expenses until she is settled." Teresa interjected. "This property is also in an excellent school district, which means it will hold its value. It is really an investment." I stared at them, incredulous. My collection, which I had built piece by piece over years, which I maintained with my own hands, which connected me to my grandfather and the little girl who once dreamed of beautiful cars, was being dismissed as a frivolous hobby that should be sacrificed for Natalie's latest fresh start. "What if we look at more affordable options?" I suggested. "I could help Natalie find a good apartment, maybe co-sign a lease. Or I could help her with job placement, use some of my business connections." Natalie's face fell. "But I have already started planning the housewarming party, and Teresa says this neighborhood is really exclusive." My parents exchanged a look that I recognized from childhood, the one that said I was being difficult. "Alva," my father said sternly, "this is not just about a house. This is about supporting your sister. Family comes first, always." The implication was clear. If I refused, I was choosing objects over my sister, materialism over family. The fact that these objects were deeply meaningful to me, that I had earned them through years of dedication while Natalie had drifted from job to job, from relationship to relationship, expecting others to fund her lifestyle, was irrelevant. The conversation deteriorated from there. When I continued to resist, my mother began to cry, saying she had raised me to be more generous. My father accused me of being selfish and forgetting where I came from. Natalie sulked, shooting me wounded, looks as if I was taking away a toy she had already been promised. Teresa, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding, tried to steer the conversation back to the property, pointing out features I might have missed, as if a marble countertop or crown molding might change my mind about liquidating my most treasured possessions. I left the house that evening feeling ambushed and betrayed. As I drove home, my phone began to buzz with messages. My Aunt Susan called to tell me how disappointed she was in my attitude. My cousin Frank texted that I should remember how much my parents had sacrificed for my education, conveniently forgetting the student loans I was still paying off. It became clear that my parents had already shared their version of the story, with extended family members painting me as the selfish daughter who refused to help her struggling sister, despite having plenty of resources to do so. No mention was made of the help I had already provided over the years, or of how those resources had been squandered. I felt isolated and misunderstood, caught between my love for my family and my need to protect what I had built. I did not sleep that night, replaying the conversation and wondering if I was wrong to hold so tightly to my collection, to the physical manifestations of my journey. But every time I imagined selling the Mustang or watching the Porsche drive away with a new owner, my chest tightened with a grief that felt too intense to ignore. The pressure did not let up in the days that followed. My mother texted daily, sending additional photos of the house Natalie had set her heart on. My father left voicemails about family responsibility and how his parents had taught him the importance of sacrifice. Even relatives I rarely spoke with reached out to offer their opinions on what I should do with my own property. Natalie, emboldened by our parents' support, began sending me links to furniture she planned to buy for her new home, as if my agreement was a foregone conclusion. She even forwarded an email from Teresa about mortgage rates and closing costs, adding just FYI for when you sell the cars. Teresa herself called twice, describing the house as an exceptional investment opportunity and suggesting we meet to discuss the potential sale of my collection. She mentioned knowing several collectors who might be interested in purchasing the vehicles, as a lot saving me the trouble of individual sales. The assumption that I would eventually cave under pressure was infuriating. No one seemed to consider that these cars were mine, purchased with money I had earned, maintained with skills I had developed, and cherished for reasons beyond their monetary value. The situation escalated dramatically on a Saturday afternoon. I was in my garage performing routine maintenance on the Ferrari when a car pulled into my driveway. Natalie stepped out, followed by two people I did not recognize, a man and a woman dressed in expensive casual wear. Before I could ask why she was there, Natalie breezed past me into the garage. "These are my friends, Keith and Samantha," she announced. "They wanted to see the cars. Keith is really into classic vehicles." I stared at her, stunned by the presumption. "You cannot just show up unannounced with strangers to look at my cars." She rolled her eyes. "Do not be so dramatic. Keith might even be interested in buying one when you sell. He collects vintage Porsches." Keith moved toward the 911, hand outstretched as if to touch the hood. I stepped between him and the car. "Please do not touch anything," I said firmly. "These are not for sale and I did not invite you here." Samantha laughed, a tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. "Natalie said you were protective of your toys. Seems a bit silly for someone. Your age does not it." Natalie was already moving toward the Aston Martin, running her finger along its polished surface. "Remember when you let me drive this one? I totally felt like a spy." "I never let you drive the Aston Martin," I said, alarm rising. "You asked once and I said no." She shrugged. "Well, maybe it was a different one. They all kind of looked the same to me." The casual disregard for my boundaries, for the distinction between these unique vehicles that each held special meaning to me, was the last straw. "You need to leave," I said, my voice low but firm. "All of you. Now." Natalie looked shocked, as if the possibility of being asked to leave had never occurred to her. "But we just got here." I do not care. This is my property, and you did not ask permission to bring strangers into my garage. The argument that followed was ugly. Natalie accused me of being selfish and materialistic. I countered that she was entitled and presumptuous. Keith and Samantha stood awkwardly to the side before eventually retreating to their car. As Natalie finally stormed out, she turned back with a parting shot. It does not matter anyway. They will all be mine soon enough. Dad says you will come around once you realize what is really important. That comment, delivered with such certainty, sent a chill through me. The conviction in her voice suggested this was not just wishful thinking on her part. There was a plan in motion, one that my family seemed confident would succeed. 2 days later, my fears were confirmed when Teresa arrived at my home, unannounced, Natalie in tow. Teresa carried a folder of documents which she tried to present to me as I stood blocking my doorway. "I just need a few signatures," she said brightly. "I have found a buyer interested in the entire collection. The offer is very reasonable considering the quick sale." Natalie bounced on her toes behind her. "Is not that great? No hassle for you, and we can close on the house next month." I was speechless, staring at the folder as if it contained something venomous. When I finally found my voice, it was steady despite my racing heart. "I have not agreed to sell anything," I said. "I have not even considered it. And I would certainly never sign anything without having my lawyer review it first." Teresa's professional demeanor faltered slightly. "Your father gave me the impression that this was a family decision that had already been made." "My father has no authority over my property," I replied. "Neither does Natalie. These cars belong to me alone, purchased with my money, titled in my name." Natalie's face clouded. "Why are you being so difficult? It is just stuff. Stuff you can buy again later." I closed the door without responding, then leaned against it, heart pounding. This had gone beyond pressure tactics into something that felt dangerously close to coercion. The casual way they had arrived with paperwork expecting me to sign over assets worth $1.5 million was stunning in its audacity. That evening, I noticed something that sent another wave of unease through me. The spare key to my garage, which I kept on a hook in my kitchen, was missing. I could not remember the last time I had seen it, which meant it could have been gone for days or even weeks. I called Jackson, my friend from the car club and restoration expert, to share my concerns. His response was not reassuring. "That is weird timing," he said. "Someone called me last week asking about your collection, wanting to know specifics about the cars and their value. Said they were a potential buyer. When I asked for more details, they hung up." The next day, reviewing footage from the security cameras I had installed around my property, I discovered something disturbing. While I was at work, Natalie and my father had visited my house using a key to enter. They spent nearly an hour in my garage examining the cars, opening doors, and taking photos. In one clip, I could clearly hear my father say, "Once Alva comes to her senses, we will need to move quickly." The implication was clear. They were preparing to sell my collection with or without my explicit consent. Perhaps they thought they could pressure me into signing something, or maybe they believed they had some legal right to make decisions about my property. Either way, the boundary violation was profound. That night I lay awake considering my options. I could continue to refuse, but the pressure was only increasing. I could seek a restraining order, but that would permanently damage my relationship with my family. I could move the cars to a storage facility, but most in the area were not equipped for vehicles of this value and sensitivity. I called Marcus, a friend who practiced family law. After explaining the situation, he confirmed my fears. While my family had no legal right to sell my property without my consent, family pressure could be intense, and there were cases of people being manipulated into signing documents they later regretted. "If you are concerned they might take more aggressive action, you should secure your assets," he advised. "And document everything just in case." As I hung up, I felt a profound sadness mixed with resolve. My family, the people who should have been proud of what I had built, who should have respected my boundaries and my achievements, were instead treating me as if my success made me obligated to fund Natalie's lifestyle. The cars, which represented so much more to me than their monetary value, were seen as nothing more than assets to be liquidated for someone else's benefit. I reached for my phone and called Jackson again. This time, I had a plan. Jackson met me at a quiet coffee shop the next morning, away from my usual haunts where family or acquaintances might spot us. His face was serious as I outlined my concerns. "So you think they might try to move the cars without your permission?" he asked, voice low, despite the empty tables around us. "I do not know what they might do," I admitted. "But they have a key. They have been in my garage taking inventory. And they seem convinced that I will eventually give in. I cannot risk it." Jackson nodded slowly. "I have that large warehouse space in the industrial district, used to store restoration projects. It is climate-controlled, secure, plenty of room for all 10 vehicles." The relief I felt was immediate. Could I move them there temporarily until this blows over? He pulled out his phone and checked a calendar. "Space is mostly empty right now. Project I was working on just finished. We could do it, but we would need to be careful. Moving 10 high-value vehicles at once could attract attention." We spent the next hour developing a detailed plan. The move would happen at night when traffic was minimal. We would enlist trusted drivers from our car club people who had experience handling valuable vehicles and who had no connection to my family. Each car would take a slightly different route to avoid creating an obvious convoy. Jackson would handle the logistics of preparing the warehouse, ensuring the security system was upgraded and access limited to just the two of us. "I think we should do it tomorrow night," Jackson suggested. "Midnight to 4 a.m. That gives us time to prepare but does not leave a window for your family to catch wind of it." I agreed despite the knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. The idea of moving my beloved collection in secret like a thief in the night was painful. These cars should have been celebrated, driven proudly in the sunlight, not smuggled away under cover of darkness. But I saw no alternative if I wanted to protect what I had built. Over the next 24 hours, we put the plan into motion. Jackson enlisted 8 other drivers, all people he vouched for personally. I provided detailed information about each vehicle, its quirks, and requirements. We mapped out different routes to the warehouse estimated timing and created a communication system using a private chat group. While Jackson prepared the warehouse, I focused on the legal aspects. I gathered all documentation proving my ownership of each vehicle. I wrote a formal letter revoking any previous access my family members might have had to my property. I even consulted with a security specialist about changing the locks and upgrading my home security system. The night of the move, I could barely breathe through the tension. At 11:30 p.m., the first drivers began to arrive, parking their personal vehicles discreetly down the street and approaching my house on foot. Jackson arrived last, carrying a small duffel bag containing gloves, flashlights, and communication devices. We gathered in my garage 10 drivers, including myself and Jackson, standing amongst the cars that had defined so much of my adult life. Looking at them under the harsh garage lights, I felt a wave of emotion so strong it nearly buckled my knees. These machines were not just metal and leather and paint. They were physical manifestations of my journey, tactile reminders of obstacles overcome and goals achieved. "All right," Jackson said, quietly breaking the moment. "Everyone knows their vehicle and route. Phones on silent headsets and emergency protocol in place. We move at 5-minute intervals, starting with the Mustang. Questions?" The room was silent. These were car people. They understood what these vehicles meant. They also understood what it meant that I felt the need to move them in secret. Sophia, a fellow club member who had photographed my collection numerous times, squeezed my arm. "They will be safe," she promised. "We will make sure of it." At exactly midnight, the garage door opened silently. The first driver, a retired mechanic named George, slipped into the Mustang. The engine caught immediately, a soft rumble in the quiet night. He eased out of the garage and down the driveway, headlights off until he reached the street, then disappeared into the darkness. One by one, the cars left my garage. The Jaguar, the Porsche, the Mercedes. Each departure felt like watching a piece of myself drive away. I stood in the increasingly empty space, emotions warring within me. Sadness that it had come to this. Anger at my family for forcing this choice. Fear that something might go wrong. Relief that I was taking action to protect what I had built. Jackson stayed with me until it was time for the last two vehicles. I would drive the Lamborghini while he took the Dodge Viper. As we prepared to leave, he paused, looking around the nearly empty garage. "You are doing the right thing," he said firmly. "No one has the right to take what you have earned." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Then I slid into the driver's seat of the Lamborghini, feeling the familiar leather embrace me. The engine roared to life louder than was ideal for a stealth operation, but there was no helping the Countach's dramatic nature. As I pulled away from my home, watching the garage door close on an empty space in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange mixture of loss and determination. I had not wanted this conflict. I had always tried to be a good daughter, a supportive sister. But somewhere along the way, support had transformed into expectation, and expectation into entitlement. The drive to the warehouse took 30 minutes, following back roads and industrial areas to avoid attention. As I pulled into the loading bay, I saw the other 8 cars already parked in neat rows, their drivers standing in a small group talking quietly. Sophia approached as I exited the Lamborghini. "That is 9, she said. "Just waiting on Jackson with the Viper." He arrived 5 minutes later, the distinctive rumble of the Viper's V10 announcing his approach. As he parked alongside the other vehicles completing the collection, a collective breath seemed to release from the group. "All secure," Jackson confirmed, tossing me a set of keys. "New warehouse security system installed today. Only you and I have the code." I looked at the gathered drivers, these friends who had risked potential legal complications to help me protect my property. "Thank you," I said simply. "I do not know how to express what this means to me." They understood. No explanations were necessary. One by one, they departed in vehicles that had been arranged to take them home, until only Sophia, Jackson, and I remained in the warehouse. "You can stay with me for a few days," Sophia offered, "in case your family comes looking for the cars at your place." I nodded gratefully. The thought of returning to my empty garage was too painful to contemplate just yet. As we locked up the warehouse, securing my collection behind multiple layers of protection, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. I had taken action to protect what was mine. I had set a boundary, even if it was one my family did not yet know about. Whatever came next, I would face it knowing I had done what I needed to do. The fallout began at 7:30 the next morning when my father called, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What have you done with the cars, Alva?" he demanded without preamble. I paused, sipping the coffee Sophia had made me, gathering my thoughts. "Good morning to you too, Dad." "Do not play games. I stopped by your house this morning to discuss the sale again, and the garage is empty." "Where are they?" The immediacy of his visit confirmed my suspicions. He had intended to escalate the pressure, perhaps even to take matters into his own hands. "They are somewhere safe," I replied calmly. "Somewhere where no one can make decisions about them except me." "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "You are acting like we are trying to steal from you. We are trying to help your sister build a stable life. By taking what I have worked 15 years to build, that is not help, Dad. That is theft, regardless of your intentions." The conversation deteriorated from there. My father accused me of being selfish, materialistic, and disloyal to the family. I remained calm, repeating that the cars were my property purchased with my money and not available for others to claim. Shortly after, my mother called, tears in her voice. "How could you do this to your sister? She was counting on that house. We already told the sellers we were interested." I had not agreed to anything, I reminded her. "You made promises on my behalf without my consent." "Because we thought you would do the right thing," she replied, as if my refusal to liquidate my assets for Natalie's benefit was a moral failing rather than a boundary. The text messages from Natalie were less restrained. A series of angry messages filled with accusations and profanity flooded my phone. She claimed I had ruined her life, destroyed her chance at happiness, and proven I never cared about her. The final message was particularly telling. Dad says we can sue you for the cars since they belong to the family. That text prompted an immediate call to Marcus, my lawyer friend. When I relayed Natalie's threat, he laughed without humor. They have absolutely no legal claim to your property, he assured me. But the fact that they think they might is concerning. It suggests they have convinced themselves they have rights they do not actually possess. 3 days after the move, a formal-looking letter arrived from a law firm I did not recognize. It requested the immediate return of family assets that had been improperly removed, citing an obligation to family welfare and shared heritage. Marcus reviewed the letter and snorted. "This is legal nonsense," he said. "There is threatening language wrapped in legalese, but no actual legal basis for their claims. They are trying to intimidate you." With his help, I drafted a response. It was brief and unambiguous, stating that the vehicles were my sole property, legally purchased and titled in my name only, and that any attempt to claim otherwise would be met with appropriate legal action. I also included a formal notice, revoking any permission my family members might have had to enter my property, specifically noting that any keys in their possession should be returned immediately, and that unauthorized entry would be treated as trespassing. The letter was a line drawn in the sand, a boundary established in the clearest possible terms. Sending it was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but also one of the most necessary. Natalie's response was a series of voice messages alternating between rage and tearful manipulation. She accused me of choosing cars over her happiness, of betraying the family, and finally, of never having loved her at all. The last message ended with a threat to report the cars as stolen to the police. That threat crossed a line. With Marcus's guidance, I sent one final communication to my entire family. It was direct and firm, explaining that the cars were legally mine, their location was secure and documented, and any false reports to authorities would constitute filing a false police report, which was itself a crime. I then blocked Natalie's number, set my parents' calls to go directly to voicemail, and took a step back from the situation. The constant barrage of guilt, manipulation, and threats had taken a toll on my mental health. I needed space to process what had happened and to decide how to move forward. During this period of limited contact, I threw myself into work. The company had been somewhat neglected during the family crisis, and several important projects needed my attention. I also joined a support group for people dealing with difficult family dynamics, finding comfort in the stories of others who had faced similar challenges. 3 months passed with minimal contact with my family. I sent brief, polite responses to my parents' occasional messages, but maintained firm boundaries about what I was willing to discuss. I ignored the increasingly infrequent texts from extended family members offering unsolicited opinions about the situation. During this time, something unexpected happened. Without my financial support and with our parents unable to fulfill the promise of a house, Natalie was forced to fend for herself for perhaps the first time in her adult life. According to my mother's cautious updates, Natalie had taken a job at a coffee shop called Java Junction. It was entry-level work, making lattes and serving pastries with hours that started before dawn. My mother mentioned this with a tone that suggested she expected me to be horrified that my sister was reduced to such work. Instead, I felt a glimmer of hope. Real work with real responsibilities and real consequences for failure was exactly what Natalie had avoided for years. Perhaps this experience would provide the structure and accountability she needed. As I focused on healing and rebuilding, I channeled some of my energy into positive projects. I expanded the annual charity car show, partnering with a technical college to create a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in automotive restoration. I also began speaking on podcasts about entrepreneurship, sharing my journey, but also touching on the importance of boundaries, even with family. These conversations were therapeutic, allowing me to process my experiences while potentially helping others facing similar pressures. Then, 3 months and 2 weeks after the night we moved the cars, a text arrived from a number I did not recognize. It is Natalie. I got a new phone. I know you probably do not want to hear from me, but I wanted to say I am sorry. For everything. I am working at Java Junction now. If you ever want to talk, I would like that. No pressure, no car talk, just coffee. On me. I stared at the message for a long time, emotions swirling. It was brief, simple, and notably lacking in the dramatic language Natalie typically employed. There were no accusations, no guilt trips, no demands. Could people change that much in 3 months? I was skeptical. This could be another manipulation tactic, a new approach when the previous ones had failed. But it could also be genuine, a first step toward accountability and a healthier relationship. After much consideration, I replied, I need some time to think about this, but I appreciate the message. Her response came quickly, take all the time you need, I will be here. Working. A lot. That small hint of self-deprecating humor, so unlike the entitled Natalie I had known, gave me pause. Perhaps something really had changed. 2 weeks later, I agreed to meet her at Java Junction during her break. I was nervous, unsure what to expect, but certain that whatever happened, I would maintain the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. The text from Natalie had been simple but profound in its implications. There was no mention of cars, no hint of entitlement, just a straightforward apology and an invitation to talk. The shift in tone was so dramatic that I approached our meeting with equal parts hope and skepticism. Java Junction was a trendy, independent coffee shop in a renovated industrial building downtown. I arrived early, choosing a table near the back where I could watch the door. Natalie was working behind the counter, dressed in the company's green apron, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked different somehow, more substantial, less like the polished but hollow persona she had cultivated for years. When she spotted me, she gave a small wave but continued serving customers. There was no dramatic reunion, no rushing over to make a scene. She simply finished helping a businessman with his order, then spoke briefly to her manager before approaching my table still wearing her apron. Thanks for coming, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. I get a 15-minute break now and then, another 30 after the lunch rush. She placed a large latte in front of me. Oat milk, vanilla extra shot, right? I was surprised she remembered my coffee preference. Right, thanks. An awkward silence fell between us, years of conflict and recent betrayal creating a chasm not easily bridged by casual conversation. You look good, I finally offered. The job suits you. She laughed, a genuine sound without the performative quality I was used to. I do not know about that. My feet kill me every night, and I still cannot make latte art to save my life. But it is honest work. She hesitated. I should have done this years ago. Done what I asked. Gotten a real job. Supported myself. She looked down at the table. Stopped expecting everyone else to solve my problems. The directness of her self-assessment caught me off guard. I had prepared for manipulation, for subtle attempts to re-establish the old dynamic, not for this apparent self-awareness. What changed? I asked carefully. Everything, she replied simply. When you moved the cars and refused to give in, it was like a wake-up call. Mom and Dad could not buy me the house they had promised. They were embarrassed with Teresa, with the sellers. Dad was so sure you would cave eventually that he had made all these promises he could not keep. She twisted a napkin between her fingers. At first, I was furious with you. But then I realized something. All these years, I had been blaming everyone else for my problems. Why I could not keep a job, why I was always broke despite all the help I got. It was always someone else's fault. Her 15-minute break stretched to 20 as she explained her journey over the past months, how she had been forced to confront her lack of job history when applying for positions, how the first week at Java Junction had been humbling with customers treating her as invisible or being rude over trivial issues. How the simple achievement of receiving her first paycheck had given her a sense of pride she had never experienced before. I need to get back, she said, glancing at the time. But if you want to stay, my longer break is at 2. We could talk more. I nodded, still processing this new version of my sister. I will be here. As I watched her return to work efficiently, taking orders and making change, I considered the transformation before me. Was it genuine? Only time would tell. But the Natalie who had demanded I sell my car collection to buy her a house would never have worn that apron, never have apologized without conditions, never have acknowledged her own role in her difficulties. When her afternoon break came, we talked more deeply. She shared stories about difficult customers and small victories, how she had managed to pay her own rent for the first time without borrowing money, her plans to take community college classes in business administration in the evening, inspired partly by watching the coffee shop managers. I would like to own a small business someday, she admitted. Nothing fancy, maybe a shop like this, but something that is mine that I built. The echo of my own entrepreneurial journey was not lost on me, though her path was beginning very differently than mine had. As our conversation continued over the following weeks, meeting for coffee became a regular occurrence. Natalie never asked for money, never mentioned the cars, never attempted to re-establish the old patterns of dependence. Instead, she asked questions about budgeting, about how to balance work and school, about professional behavior in workplace settings. 6 weeks after our first coffee meeting, I felt secure enough in this new dynamic to broach the subject of our parents. Have you talked to Mom and Dad much? I asked carefully. She nodded, stirring her coffee. They are still adjusting. Mom keeps suggesting easier jobs, places where I would not have to work so hard. Dad has offered to pay my rent 3 times now. And have you let them? I asked, testing the boundaries of this new reality. Natalie shook her head firmly. I need to do this myself. For once in my life, I want to know I can stand on my own 2 feet. She looked up at me. I was so angry when you refused to buy me that house. I thought you were being cruel. Now I realize it would have been cruel to say yes. That conversation opened the door to a careful reconciliation with our parents. The first meeting was tense, held on neutral ground at a restaurant halfway between our homes. I set clear boundaries about what was open for discussion and what was not. My cars, my business decisions, and my financial choices were off limits. My father struggled with these limitations, his patriarchal assumption of authority over family decisions deeply ingrained. My mother vacillated between joy at having both daughters speaking to her again and discomfort with the new dynamic where her manipulation tactics were gently but firmly rejected. It was not an instant healing. There were missteps and old patterns that emerged in moments of stress. But slowly, a new type of relationship began to form. One built on mutual respect, rather than obligation and entitlement. As for my beloved car collection, it remained in Jackson's warehouse for 6 months while I sorted through these complex family dynamics. Eventually, when I felt secure that the boundaries I had established would be respected, I moved them back to a newly secured garage at my home, complete with an advanced security system and legal protections that Marcus had helped me put in place. The first time Natalie saw them again was nearly a year after the night we had moved them in secret. She had come to help with the annual charity car show, volunteering to handle registration and ticket sales. As we walked through my garage preparing vehicles for display, she paused by the Porsche. I get it now, she said quietly. Why these mean so much to you. They are not just things, they are your story. That simple acknowledgement coming from the person who had once dismissed my collection as frivolous toys meant more than she could know. The journey with my family continues with progress and occasional setbacks. But the fundamental lesson remains: setting boundaries is not selfish. Protecting what you have built is not cruel. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for others is to refuse to enable harmful patterns, even when that refusal causes short-term pain. My car collection still sits in my garage, each vehicle a testament to a specific chapter in my journey. I still take them to shows, still spend weekends tinkering with engines and polishing chrome, but now they represent something more. They stand as a reminder that I had the courage to protect what mattered to me, to stand firm when it would have been easier to give in. and Natalie. She was promoted to shift supervisor at Java Junction 6 months after starting there. She is halfway through her business administration degree, taking classes in the evening after work. She rents a modest one-bedroom apartment that she furnished herself with second-hand finds she proudly refinished. She has, for the first time in her adult life, a savings account with more than a token balance. Our relationship is stronger now than it ever was in our childhood, built on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation. We will never be the same people we were before this conflict, but perhaps that is for the best. Sometimes the most painful experiences lead to the most necessary growth. What would have happened if I had given in, if I had sold my collection to buy Natalie that house? The pattern would have continued. The expectation of rescue reinforced the opportunity for her to discover her own strength lost. By saying no, by protecting what I had built, I ultimately gave her something far more valuable than a house. I gave her the chance to build her own life, one she could be genuinely proud of. That is the power of healthy boundaries. They do not just protect us. Sometimes in ways we cannot foresee, they protect those around us too, forcing growth that would otherwise never occur. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with people you love? What happened when you stood your ground to protect something important to you? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing firm is sometimes the most loving choice you can make. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, the things you build with your own hands and heart are worth protecting.